Hey everyone, welcome to another rousing episode of Political Campaign Communication Com 394. I'm your host, Mike Lee. Welcome everybody to this week's topic, which is campaigns in the news media. In some ways, this is a huge topic, too big for 1 week. In fact, in many instances, you could say the entire course in the modern era is kind of defined around the idea that campaigns are news media fodder. The way that most people experience campaigns is not by attending rallies, but is in fact on television, on the radio, even now podcasts and the internet. And so it is a mediated phenomenon. And in many senses, it's by news and also entertainment media like SNL skits or Key and Peele skits or something like that. Another way this topic is important because it introduces lots of vocabulary terms like horse race coverage, where campaigns treat or news media treat campaigns as a kind of contest, a horse race, if you will. Who's winning in Pennsylvania? What are polls looking like in Iowa? What are polls looking like in California? How is this particular demographic, women, African Americans, going to support Obama or the challenger? And so it's not about the politics or the policies or the exchange of ideas or the deliberations of the candidates, and more about how you might cover a sports game. Another key concept that's discussed well in your reading that I'm not going to talk about this week is the softening of the news media coverage of campaigns, where it's more about painting the picture, a rosy picture of the candidate and the personality of the candidate, the upbringing of the candidate, the family of the candidate, as opposed to the political priorities and beliefs and governing philosophies that that candidate brings, so that voters are not just voting for a person, but they're voting for a person with very specific ideas. What we're going to do this week is focus, and we're going to focus very specifically on something that drives the news media wild about campaigns, and that is the subject of gaffes. Other than a horse race coverage, gaffes and coverage of fumbles, flubs, slip-ups, screw-ups, all of these things under this broad heading of this big media term called gaffe comprise a massive portion of our news media coverage and our news media experience. News media people are waiting with bated breath for candidates to screw up, to commit a gaffe, and then they can convene a roundtable on CNN or Fox News to talk about the meaning of that gaffe, the broader significance of the gaffe, whether the voting public will care about the gaffe come November 2nd, and on and on and on. And so there is something very revealing about news media coverage, and also very revealing about the way that candidates and candidacies are structured to avoid gaffes, that gives us insight into what it means to really campaign in the modern era, and to avoid slip-ups, and to avoid the appearance that a campaign is circling the drain and has gone off the rails. And so I'd like to begin with one simple gaffe before we get into the history of gaffes since 1960 in the modern era. One simple gaffe, relatively recently, just 11 years ago now, is the so-called Dean Scream, just to get us rolling. And so in the next clip, you're going to see the Dean Scream after Howard Dean had just finished third in the Iowa caucus. At that time, he was an insurgent candidate, a kind of relative nobody as the governor of Vermont. National news media hadn't heard of him, but then he became a force, challenging Kerry and many of the other establishment candidates in the 2004 election, and he was very much the anti-George Bush. As conservative as Bush was, Howard Dean represented the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, and so the news media jumped on him as a kind of a firebrand, upstart, unexpected story, and then he tubed his candidacy with this so-called Dean Scream. And I'll explain after the video why I think it was unfair of them to do that, but also how powerful that was of news media play and replay and play and replay the Dean Scream was to future candidacies.